All right, buddy, coming off the win against the Hawks, looking good in the process. Hit us with the beats.
So many questions, so many answers, my friends, as the City Edition jerseys were adorned by the Brooklyn Nets. Kevin Durant continues to tell you that he's going to be dominant all season long, and we get a lot of nice little check marks in the supporting role category for this Brooklyn Nets roster. Took 8 games, but we finally got that real sample size that says, yes, the Brooklyn Nets know what they're doing this season, and everybody's going to slide right into their little pockets. They did a lot of great things against Trae Young, a lot of the weapons for the Atlanta Hawks, and really, in big spurts, were able to dominate on both ends of the floor and get a fairly convincing win.
Yeah, this is a really good one. They look good, and the uniforms look great. We'll talk about that too. Got a full and packed podcast here. Thanks for making Locked On Nets your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all podcast platforms. We're going to get into it all, but first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. And just when you thought that the reports of the Brooklyn Nets demise were going to substantiate, it's a 3-game victory where I am Adam Armbrecht over at Adam Armbrecht on Twitter, and he is Doug Norrie at Doug Norrie, blue checkmark on Twitter, also covering you with DFSR, all your daily fantasy needs. How we feeling, buddy? Check mark for the Brooklyn Nets now as they take care of the Atlanta Hawks at home.
I think you meant to say three-game win streak, but there we can do a 3-game victory. You said 3-game victory. It's all right.
No, is that how they don't tally that way in the NBA? 3-game victory streak. That's the classic way that they say it. I may be running. It's European, I think.
No, it's what. No, this isn't the example, but the all-time great example that when you're talking to someone that doesn't watch sports, I've always noticed. Oh, there's lots of tells, but the one is where they say the losing score first. It's like, oh, the game was 100 to 118. I'm like, oh, it's your first game you ever saw. Cool. That's yeah, no. So it was a good victory. We sometimes like to pat ourselves on the back for things we thought were going to, sort of happen in games. And I think in this one, it actually kind of went the opposite way. Things we were worried about for what could happen in this game ended up sort of not coming to fruition as much. And the Nets, they looked. It was a little shaky to start, but when they got rolling downhill, you saw what can happen with the offense when things are really clicking, right? When the spacing's good, when the ball's kind of moving around, when specifically Atlanta was having trouble kind of like making up on some closeouts and stuff, and they just got a lot of easy looks. And we can talk about Kevin Durant too, but in general, just from a high level, there was a lot of little things the Nets did really well here, and it definitely started with the offense. The offense was really popping at times.
Yeah, you mentioned about the things we were worried about early in the game. Nets got beat up a little bit on a couple of second chance opportunities. Offensive rebounds were there for Atlanta. You thought, yeah, this is some of the things we kind of wondered about, but they basically played them even in a lot of those categories as the game went along. And then to your point, the thing that we've been waiting for is behind Kevin Durant, who gives another. This is the sit back and relax. The guy's going to give you 30 like it was shooting practice for him. But then some of the other guys, Joe Harris and the like, start to fill out behind him, and you saw just a little bit more balance. The Nets did a great job in a couple of key areas as far as keeping that space between them and the Hawks on the scoreboard. But early on, Kevin Durant, I mean, this is always going to be redundant when we come on and he's the leading scorer. But his game is foolproof. Like there is no method. Like even when you're complimenting defenders, I think Hunter picked him up a couple of times. They go, some good defense there. Yeah, good defense on a made basket though. Like it's not good defense and you shut down Kevin Durant. It's hey, heck of an effort, buddy. We'll see you on the next trip down. I mean, Kevin Durant is as locked in as we've seen him in a Nets uniform.
Yeah, I thought Hunter did a good job of it on defense for the most part. Like he was fronted most of the time. He had very little space to operate. And you look when it's all over, he's got 32 points on 13 of 20 shooting, and really nothing looked even all that difficult. Even with a defender in his hip pocket most of the time, it just really ended up not mattering. And you said it's redundant. It's like it's almost silly. You just start taking it for granted. I can actually see why. You can see why. the all-time greats, and Kevin Durant's among that group, you can see why they become sort of like a little less appreciated over time, because you just get used to be like, oh yeah, it's just super easy. You can just do whatever you want. Let's just talk about the other guys, because we're just, with him, it's just, it's so effortless, and it's not going to be that every single game. Obviously, it hasn't been, but in this one, you got a sense of, again, or a reminder, really, because you already know this is to be the case, but you get a reminder of when he's sort of dialed in, and he kind of understands, like, the defender doesn't have anything to really provide him. It kind of just doesn't matter. He just is able to get to a spot, rise, and fire. And if the guy can be in his face, it just simply doesn't matter. And I actually have a little theory about Kevin. We can save this for another show. I have a theory about it's along the line. It's not as detailed as my.
Is it that Kevin Durant's good at basketball?
No, it's got. I'll just say it real quick. His shot actually is a little different than most other players. Like, when he brings the ball up, he kind of brings it up a little bit over his head to the left in a way that a lot of other players don't. And I actually think it makes it even more difficult for defender. Like, it's another reason why, even when guys are in his face, it's harder to defend, because it's just a little different than the average regular NBA shot. Because if you think about the Kevin Durant shot, it comes up a little bit, and then it comes up in a little. I'm doing a thing. It comes up a little bit over the left side of his head, and when you're a basketball player, anything that just deviates, especially on defense, deviates a little bit from the norm or the thing that you've seen your whole life, it just makes it impossible to, like, even put the hand in the right place. And so it's my theory about why Harden's good. He's good for a lot of different reasons, but I think he's also really good because he's lefty, and people just aren't used to defending lefty guys as much as they are righties. Anyway, Durant, long story short, this is like long-winded way to say, yeah, it's just another amazing performance from Durant. I mean, they're playing a really good team in the Hawks, and they dispatched them very easily, because once he gets rolling downhill, it's almost like everyone else started feeding off of it.
Oh, of course. And then listen, you can throw it in too. I think one of the things that washes over top of us as well is he's been looking early on in this season even more locked in on the defensive end as well. And you can't overlook that when we know where the Nets are trying to find that balance. And as you mentioned on the last episode, the Nets have actually been pretty effective on the defensive end. It's been all about the second chance opportunities and getting outshot or giving up more attempts to the opposition, so they have more looks at the basket. I'm trying to remember where they ended up being in that field goal percentage around the league. There's a couple of numbers there that were worth noting. The other, I'll say quickly here, Kevin Durant was dominant. I want to get into Harden, because the second half started to show some things, I think, there. And then all of these role players, including some more thoughts adding on to the LaMarcus Aldridge piece, where he fits in and where some of these new players fit in that the Nets got this offseason. But quickly, City Edition jerseys, man.
Oh yeah,
this is.
How do we not start with this?
I know. Well, it's my get into the mix. I forgot until I was picturing Kevin Durant like training some of these looks.
Yeah.
So if you didn't watch the game, or I'm sure
I also want to start the episode over. We won't, but like we just
a world where we should. Yeah,
we should. But man, God, sorry, I cut you off.
No, but so this is obviously, it's a throwback to the New Jersey days. They redid the court, had the blue border, had the Nets traditional old school logo on the center court there. And then the uniforms look fantastic. We know last year they had done kind of like the throwback Nets logo with the powder blue look, but this was ABA. They had the ABA flare with the stars down the side. Like, these are phenomenal, man. Like, I love the traditional uniforms. I love the black and white, like the very, straight, no nonsense. But if you told me that they were going to like merge these things together, which they did, by the way, there's this alternate logo out there. Sorry to get long-winded. You know that I get in the weeds on this stuff. There's an alternate logo out there that is the old school Nets logo, which is that triangle and had the swirl going around it. But then they incorporate the B Brooklyn into it. Like, I was just like, man, there is a world where you can merge these things together and end up having arguably the best jersey in the league. I thought it was phenomenal. The court looked fantastic. Everything was great about it.
Yeah, look, I'm not like, I actually never care about the uniforms at all. I don't know what anyone's number is. I'm just not, it's just not the thing that I care about at all when it comes to basketball. I know other people are really into it. Sneakers, I just could honestly care less. I never notice what anyone's wearing on their feet. Other people pay a lot of attention to it. It's cool. I kind of wish
Carter was wearing one black shoe and one yellow shoe the other night. You didn't pick up on that?
No, was he really?
That's a dead serious thing. One solid black shoe, one solid yellow shoe, and I'm sure it's a thing. I'm assuming.
Oh, I actually maybe did notice that. Maybe that kind of does sound familiar. But anyway, in general, people get excited about. I think it's cool. I sort of wish I was a little more into it. I'm just not. These things are awesome. They're
Yeah,
awesome.
there we
Like
go.
they were. I was as soon as I saw, we knew they were. We knew they were going to look like already. So it wasn't a huge reveal, and we knew the court was going to be like this. But as soon as they unveiled this thing, this is why I wish we had just started with this. But as soon as they unveiled this thing, I was thinking, oh, they can't lose this game. They cannot lose this game with these uniforms because it's just too good. The story's too good. The uniforms look so amazing. The court looks so great. They got even like the little devil kind of.
Swoop off the end. Yeah.
And off the end, that kind of looks like the devil tail. I couldn't think of that. Like a little, to the New Jersey thing. The whole thing was really awesome. So, I mean, between the Durant game and the City Edition jerseys, I was here for it. Believe me, I gotta tell you, if I'm into it, it takes so much for me to even to even notice.
Right.
I just won't notice. I just watch other things in the game. I'm just not an artistic guy, so my eye isn't drawn to it. We got a ton of other stuff to talk about here. We will not go on about the jerseys all day for sure. Don't worry about that. We're gonna talk a little hard. We'll talk some role players, talk a little some of the adjustments that the Nets made as well as this game went on, because this game was closer for a while than the score would let you on to believe. Like it ended up being very easy in the end. It definitely was not the case to start. We'll get into all that here in a second. First, if you are having problems with your car, like look, right now a car could be a super intimidating thing. It has how many parts do you think are in a car, Adam?
7.
There's actually more than 7. It's less than, I usually say it's less than 2,000, but it's more than 7. So it's somewhere in there.
I'll take
and if you need a part for your car, it can feel really intimidating. You head on to the local place, like they kind of disappear into the cavern after typing something into the computer. You don't really, it's hard to trust you're going to get the exact right thing. Sometimes it comes in an unmarked box. Believe me, I've been there. I'm like, are you sure this is the right kind of fuse? They're like, definitely. Don't worry about it. It's an unmarked box, but trust us. No, not at Rock Auto, folks. At Rock Auto, you can go and search by make and model of your car. You have to know that. You know what kind of make and model of your car, the year or two. You just search the drop-down menu. All the parts for your car are there, and they're going to be 30 or even 50% cheaper than you're going to get at the local store. I'm not even going to say the numbers of how much cheaper than it is for the mechanic, because it would just kind of shock you, because you're just getting totally hosed when you go to the mechanics. You have to go to rockauto.com. Reliably low prices for every single customer. Everything you need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and one of the other 45,000 parts for your car. Go to rockauto.com and see all the parts available for your car or truck, right? Locked in. Excuse me, no, right? Locked on in the How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Locked on in that How Did You Hear About Us box. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com.
And as we were all locked in to the Nets jerseys that they had on, you have to think about the fact that they were bringing back some of those New Jersey vibes. Just like betonline.ag wants you to know that they're bringing back the same level of excellence, and actually they're even better than ever now. They have a new web interface for the start of this basketball season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline still remains your number one spot for all the basketball and football action. That's not just NFL, that's also on the college side. And you can head over to the new updated desktop or mobile website and sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus when you make your first deposit using promo code Locked On. It's a 50% welcome bonus just for signing up. Promo code Locked On. For basketball, football, baseball season just wrapped up. Did you make some money on the Atlanta Braves winning the World Series for the first time since the mid-90s, if I'm not mistaken? NHL, boxing, UFC, right over to your favorite Vegas casino games. It's all there for you. Don't wait to take advantage of the amazing offers for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. So you mentioned that this was a little bit closer, at times than maybe the final score would indicate. And I'll just start there quickly. We want to get to Harden. Slow start for him offensively, but I think the assist game was strong for him, et cetera. And then a lot of role players. The big one I'll give you, though, just from a game standpoint, I'll make sure I get this right. End of the first quarter, Nets go on a 17-4 run. End of the second quarter, 10-3 run. End of the third quarter, 20-4 run. Yeah. So this very much followed the script that you and I talk about, where you need the starting five, the starting unit, to be able to set the tone, get out there, be dominant behind Kevin Durant. And then the second unit just needs to tread water, hold their own weight, and then allow the offense, allow the stars to come back in for these little bursts at the end of quarters and pour it back on. And that's essentially how this game went. Get a nice lead, Atlanta chips away, push it back up at the end of each quarter, and really send the message that you're not going to have an easy time coming back and getting out ahead of us in this one.
Yeah, it was that closing third quarter group that really kind of put the nail in the coffin for this game, because it was still pretty close here. But in the,
they swapped the lead there a couple times as well.
Yeah, like with 2:44 left in the game, it's a 4-point game, right?
Yep.
Like it's 83-79. And then basically the Nets, and then by the end, it's 83-79 with 2.5 left in the third quarter. And by the time the third quarter ends, it's 95-79 because it was like a Kevin Durant, Bembry, and Patty Mills show that just went on a scoring. And they played really good defense during this time too. Like the Atlanta had sort of a weird lineup. Like Lou Williams was out there. He looked terrible. But they had some they had a lineup that just really probably should score a little bit more, but just wasn't able to do it. Like this Herder, Lou Williams, Reddish group. But this is actually during that time where I was saying the ball was moving, like these Patty Mills threes. Bembry looked great getting to the rim, and then Kevin Durant hit a couple daggers, specifically that dagger right at the end of the third quarter, right? Like that actually probably is what ended the game, because it's essentially a buzzer beater to end the third quarter, and that puts them up 14. Puts them up 16 at that point. And at that point, it kind of felt like the game was over. And if they're gonna sort of make hay with those lineups, because Doris Burke mentioned it, but she mentioned something that we had already talked about in like two or three podcasts ago, which was where the Nets had won all the minutes where Harden and Durant were playing separately. Remember, we talked about that like last week, and then she mentioned it on the call today. And
fan of the show, Doris Burke.
Yeah, so she could have known that by a week ago, because we talked about this.
But we shout her out, but she doesn't shout us out, and I don't think that it's a two-way street, Doris. I'll be clear.
It's very one-sided. I don't appreciate it. But anyway, and I digress and we move on. We forge ahead. We forge ahead by not getting ESPN shout-outs. That's right. Yeah, but like they win these minutes, and actually because they win those minutes, they're allowed they can still do that little thing they did to this game too, where they threw out the no Harden and Durant lineup for like 3 minutes to see if that can just tread water on defense. And that kind of did also. So anyway, just long story short, near the end of that third quarter is when they really put the stamp on it. And it was where it was like the lineup had just enough offense to kind of punish them. Bembry played really well. And then away you go. And the game felt over by the end of the third quarter. Like I started thinking about the podcast at the end of the third quarter when he hit that shot, because I kind of knew it was over at that point.
As we often do, right? We start to get into the motions. What do we think? What's the lead in here? What's the main story? I want to get to most of the other role players are more significant than Patty Mills in this particular game. Had a couple of nice threes, but I do want to point it out because I think it was indicative of a lot of the effort we saw on the defensive end. End of the first half, there's about 2.5-3 seconds to go. Patty Mills, if you go back and watch it, he actually, as they go to inbounds, he's looking up to check what's the foul situation. Yeah. Sees that he has one to give, stays with his man, and then gets that foul just before half court. And you actually
it was on Bogdanovich. Yeah.
And you saw him like looking to his team, kind of saying, yeah, we're good. I checked it. I knew that I could get him here. 0.8 seconds. They end up having a chuck up three before the break. That level, I mean, listen, that's why you bring Patty Mills in. He's a veteran. He has experience, understands game situations, but that's the kind of level of focus you need in those those are the margin moments that you can win those kind of battles. And I think, again, was Patty Mills my highlight defensive player in this one? No, not at all. There's 3 or 4 other guys I want to get to, but that was kind of the calling card of it to everything else that was going on, especially away from the ball. A lot of guys were doing the dirty work on a play in, play out basis that, listen, especially when James Harden only put up 3 points in the first half on a late shot there, didn't get to the line. Second half starts to find his rhythm a little bit. But when you only have one superstar scorer in Kevin Durant right now in this season, you need those defensive pieces to work. And then you need something we won't any more detail than Joe Harris can shoot. Great news, guys. It turns out he still knows how to shoot the basketball, right? But that was your primary. Everything else was going to be predicated on, can you stymie and slow down this talented, deep Atlanta Hawks team? And they did that.
Yeah, no, it felt like a pretty complete performance from everyone behind it. Like, it actually felt like Harden was sort of a role player in this game, and among the role players, he's not. So, but because it's, I know why it feels like you want to just kind of mention everybody in this second part, because it's like hard to bring out. It's clearly Durant carried the team,
yes,
but it was only a carrying to the point of everyone else played just well. And so when everyone else just plays really well, the rest of the performances by everyone else end up becoming in the second group, except everyone exists in that second group sort of equally, right?
Yeah.
Like everyone is in that second group as everyone did their jobs. And that was kind of the theme for this game. I'm going to say into these City Edition, just because I want to say City Edition jersey again, even though it has nothing to do with the point. But so everyone
It's also
just
slightly odd because it's City Edition jerseys, but they're New Jersey jerseys. I digress.
Yeah. The right. So it's like you can't really call out a second player that ended up contributing the most to the victory. It was like this whole group of people all did the specific things they needed to do
Yeah.
to be able to win. They did it equally, and you get a sense. You actually get a good sense of what happens when the Nets are sort of clicking along those lines. Is that this group actually? There's always going to be the hierarchy. It's always going to be Durant first, and then without Kyrie here, it's definitely Durant first and Harden second. But you see in this game, doing all the little things that everyone can do well, like and staying in their lanes, hit threes when they're open, move the ball when you're able to, protect the glass, which they did a pretty good job on. The bigs all did a pretty good job of getting in the way, getting guys in front of Trae Young. Like they were able to do that really well after the beginning of the game, right? Like they were able to sort of really throw two good defenders at him basically the whole game. So the list ends up becoming this long running list of everything else that went really well for the team. And so it's like you kind of just give everyone an A, right?
Right. But early in the year, we haven't been able to do that, right? We haven't been able to say whatever grade you're going to give out. It was always, well, these two players, and then there's this guy over here, and then hey, let's go ahead and mention whatever, Paul Millsap. Let's mention LMA for a game, Bruce Brown, any of these guys, or Javon Carter, and just say, and then we wondered what was going on here. Joe Harris, right? Like what was his deal in this one? Instead, to your point, you really got a nice collective effort. I want to move into a few specific role players, and then we had talked about previously about the ideal 5-man lineup, who should be starting. I had mentioned LaMarcus Aldridge, and I want to add even another layer to that potentially. And so I'll cap off the conversation around Joe Harris just in saying he was obviously doing a great job from the outside, 6 of 8 3-point shooting. But to the theme of this one behind Kevin Durant on the defensive end, his off-ball defense. So we've often talked about, listen, you can't ask Joe Harris to get onto a guard on a switch and expect him to stay in front of him and prevent him from going to the rim. It's true because it's not a part of his game. But what he did a really effective job was fronting. He got caught on Collins for a couple of switches and did a respectable job of staying in front of him, denying the pass into the lane, and just frustrating the offensive flow for the Atlanta Hawks. So again, talk about Patty Mills, one little play. This is where I thought Joe Harris, his most complete game that he played for the Nets on both ends of the floor this season. And then we can get into this other group that I think there's probably a trend here as far as where the starting five should look ultimately for the Brooklyn Nets and how they create more balance. And again, what did the Nets see when they made these acquisitions in the offseason?
Yeah, no, this is what I mean. Like this is where his game needs to be, and his game needs to be a little bit more than just through threes. Obviously, like he gets paid to do more than that. He's a sharpshooter. We saw it tonight. He needs to be able to contribute on both ends of the court enough. Like he doesn't we saw in the playoffs, if he gets stuck on Middleton the whole time, it's gonna be a disaster. Things like that. But if he can just not get totally steamrolled on that end of the court, then he's gonna be a really plus player. It was uglier when the shot wasn't going down because then it can look like you're totally exposed on both ends.
Yeah.
But it makes up for so much when the shot's going in that like you can then live with if it's not going to be perfect on the other end, even though tonight he was good. Right.
Yeah.
Like, so I thought, and they were able to stop like the bigs from really kind of killing them, which we thought was going to be the problem, and it ended up just really not being the case. And so,
no surprise.
Well, oh yeah, me too. The game actually ended up moving a little
physical, right? I mean, to be able to battle with those guys when you look across the board and you go, you're losing a little bit of inch or two here, you're losing a few pounds there. Like it felt like it was ripe for Atlanta to be able to kind of force their physicality onto the Nets, and they just never did.
All right, we'll get into a little bit more of this game first. This episode of Locked On Nets is brought to you by McDonald's, the Golden Arches, baby, proudly serving community since 1965. More than a place to just get tasty, affordable food. You can find some friends there. You can find some family. You can reconnect classmates. People see study groups happening at McDonald's. You're going to get the dependable and free Wi-Fi. That's always been a huge plus. Get the French fries. Get the McFlurries going. You get some hot coffee as the weather gets a little colder here in the Northeast. I know it was a little chill in the air this morning when I headed out. Stop in McDonald's. Go in there, grab a hot coffee. Coffee, very underrated there. Win or lose, place where teammates, competitors, the home team, or the away team can go to recharge. You can head on over to local McDonald's to refuel and reconnect. You know how to say this. McDonald's, I'm loving it.
So when we get into this now, some of the bench players, the defensive effort, right off the top, I'll just cover Blake Griffin here quickly because he's come out so far and been a disaster from the perimeter on the offensive end. you're hearing some fans say that this guy is looking a little long in the tooth. What I think this year is that the Brooklyn Nets look at what he did for them last year and they say, you know what we loved? The dirty, gritty hustle plays. And if that's all that you are for us, that's actually more than enough. So we may have to start to adjust what our expectations are for Blake Griffin inside of this offense. I mentioned about Aldridge should be in the starting five. I'm committed to that. Do you think that the expectations have shifted a little bit on what Blake Griffin needs to provide this year, and maybe specifically on the offensive end, that obviously they'd had Kyrie, but that theoretically they said, listen, all we want is the hustle plays out of you. Actually, that's really that's what we brought you back for. It's not even the offensive piece. It's not the mid-range, and it's certainly not the perimeter shooting.
I mean, they're getting what they need on the defensive end, and in terms of just like sort of like the grit and grind. You hear we talk about like the long reliever kind of center minutes that you need to get during the regular season. I think they are getting that out of him on the from a physicality standpoint, because playing center in the league like a bunch of minutes is physically demanding, and so. He played 31 tonight. They are going to ask him most nights to kind of get out there and play 30 minutes at center. And that's a lot. Like that is, especially because he's undersized probably for that role in a traditional sense. So, but I think they are getting enough from him on that end. Mm-hmm. Clearly the offensive game has been a real problem. Part of that is because, well, it's pretty easy. He's just not punishing the fact that teams are just happy to let him stand on the perimeter, like, especially foul line extended stuff, and not even run out, because when they run the few times where they did sort of overcommit to the run out, which I thought really was confusing, he doesn't really want to shoot. He's happy to just wait for the run out so there's an overload so he can pass, right? Like,
so he's a good passer. That's what, he's dying for that opportunity. Yeah.
So I'll never understand why teams do that, because it doesn't, like, what are you gaining by sprinting out to get into Joe Harris's like kind of area? Like, it doesn't really make any sense to me. What I say? Oh, sorry, Blake Griffin. Because I was in my mind, I'm thinking about the time
not Joe Harris,
where he passed it, where he's able to kind of dump it off to Joe Harris or someone like that around, because like the defense is overcommitted. Until he starts making the three, actually, I don't even think he matters. Even if he made the threes, I don't think the defenses would change on him at all. I think they'll just live with it. So because I don't think it's just going to happen at this point. I think as Nets fans, we just probably need to accept that and like say that this is probably the downside. And you're just not going to have a perfect player that's going to be able to, like, for instance, this was Jeff Green a lot last year, right? Mm-hmm. That was like that you do have to really run out to, because he will make the three over and over again, or he'll kind of split you on the pick and roll. Like, Blake doesn't really do any of that stuff. And I think it's just not going to happen. And at this point, I think as fans, we probably just need to be okay with what he's contributing on the physicality side and have the expectations be pretty low, because I don't. And I actually think it's okay. I don't think they're losing a ton by him not making these shots in general, but I can get why it's tough to keep watching, because it does look bad. And my guess is, without diving too, I'll get all the numbers up for next game, but my guess is it's like something like net neutral what's happening for him out there, as long as he's not like paired with Claxton. But that's just kind of a guess, right? I'll get into it for next game. So I guess my point is, I think this is pretty much what I would expect to have happen for him. You probably have to live with it. I like what they're getting from Aldridge in the second unit, so I don't think I want to slot him in there right now. Right. And I think if he's just going to take the grind of a regular season as a starting center, I think that's what you probably are paying for at this point with him.
And because, go back to last year, you look at just by Raptor rating, he was neutral on the offensive end and then a plus on the defensive end. He's actually increased his defensive value early in this season, where the offensive game has taken a pretty big dip. So I think if we're, going to read the numbers a little bit, read the tea leaves a little, I would say they're leaning more to what his defensive value is than it is to what he's going to bring to the offensive side of it. And the reason why I say it is mostly just around the idea of like that offensive rebounding piece, right? Like, how do you get the second chance opportunities? I don't know if Blake is going to be serving that role necessarily for this team as it's currently constituted and where he is in his game. The other piece then is, with a tip of the hat to Bruce Brown, he's just doing exactly what he did last year. It turns out, when we were thinking that, pick and roll 2-man game between Harden and Claxton could be a lot of fun to watch this year, no, it's Bruce Brown. And we all should have known it was going to be Bruce Brown. Like, his ability to be versatile on the offensive end, we know what he does defensively, always valuable. Good to see him back in the lineup. Good to see that he's getting significant minutes. My focus is on Bembry. because in the same way that I said, I think Aldridge should be in the starting lineup and it can still be the ceremonial Blake Griffin, but Aldridge needs to play a significant role in having success on the offensive end for this team. I think Bembry, what you see with him is, I mentioned it last episode, not dissimilar to Bruce Brown. There's versatility there. There's athleticism there. And the one contrast you see from Aldridge, Griffin, Millsap, and I know these guys are all the bigger bodies on the team, but when you get into the offensive end, it's a little lumbering, right? It's a little bit methodical in where they get to on the floor. And when the Nets and Nash want to lean into the small ball lineups, all of a sudden you see Bembry, how he can slash to the basket, how he can switch on both ends of the floor. And there was a point when he was running side by side back on defense next to Griffin. Take it for whatever you want. He's giving up a ton of pounds, but he's not giving up a lot of size. So I think there's a value there. I started writing down like my hierarchy of this team, where are guys in the power rankings of the players. And it really does go, KD and Harden and Harris and Bruce Brown and LMA, Patty Mills is right there. And then when you get to that 7th, 8th kind of spot, it's a splitting hairs thing about where I think the Blake Griffin and Bembry minutes are, the roles are, different uses, different functions. But I think Bembry he's my next guy. I said Aldridge. Now I think Bembry is going to be the next crucial piece to this team having success in the long term this season.
Real quick, I did look up the Blake minutes. Before this game, it was like +2 with him on and -1 with him off. And this game he was basically net neutral. So I think it's going to end up being right around there. So anyway,
and by the way, and to give you the tip on it, as you were damn near close on Blake Griffin, as you almost always are, Doug. That
was eye testing that. No, I think with Bembry, I think
plus 18 in this game, by the way. That's what I was going to say about Bembry. Plus 18 in a game that they dominated. He was among the top. It's him, it's Patty Mills, and it's Kevin Durant at plus 15. A lot of guys played near neutral. The starting lineup, Griffin, +2, Harris, was just a -10 actually, for whatever that's worth. So in a game where you dominated, Bembry was among the more successful minute shares, and that can be a byproduct of who you're on the court with, obviously.
And it was a lot of it came from that run that we talked about at the end. Like that was that 13 or so run that at the end of that third quarter, that was that group. That was Bembry, Mills, Durant, I forget, Millsap and somebody else. And so like that's where you're going to get, or maybe it was Aldridge. Like that's where you're going to get that plus. That's good, by the way. Like he came in there for a very specific role. He came in there to spell Bruce Brown. This is Bembry. Spell Bruce Brown on the Trae Young assignment, which is important because you need a point of attack guy. I thought they did a pretty good job of really, between the two of those guys, of starting to frustrate him after it was looking super easy to start. And they just kind of made a commitment to say, this is not this part where you get into the lane, worm your way into the lane and punish us over and over by, or if you're going to, roll with the floater or roll, to a lob or whatever he's going to do. Like they made it so that wasn't as easy as kind of the game went on. No, but I think we said about this, like Bembry's got is one of these situations. We saw it again tonight where his versatility, like you don't want him shooting the ball a ton, but the versatility and athleticism is good, that when you can, this is what I said about Bembry, like when he was on Toronto, is that it was the same. It's so funny about the Bruce Brown comp, because this is exactly what we said about Bruce Brown. Like they just use him totally differently than the previous teams did. And it's so much better. And then it's funny about these guys in the league. You have to actually wonder how many more guys are like this in the league. They're like, oh yeah, I could probably do that too. I'm just asked to do different things for these teams. Right. Like, or maybe they don't know because it's hard to take a little sort of more of a role player. Like you're not going to have the ball a lot. Like,
or because you don't have Kevin Durant, or you don't have, right? Like the reason why Bruce Brown functions like this for the Nets is because of the other players you have on this team. Not everybody's afforded that luxury, so you don't get to scratch the surface and say, well, what if we did this with Bembry or with Brown, right? You go, Brown, you're a point guard, be on the ball and let's try to do it, right? Detroit doesn't have superstars ahead of them that frees up and creates nice little space for him.
And a lot of players just aren't going to want to just say, hey, I'm not going to touch the ball a lot, right? That's usually for a lot of players, that's not something you want to do. That's not how you play basketball. Like these guys were all the best offensive players at some point along the stop for themselves. So it's coming into new scenarios where say, you're not going to touch the ball. We need you to play tons of defense. That's not something that a lot of guys started playing basketball to sign up for, right? Or at least at this level. But Bembry's clearly one of those guys though. Like he's clearly one of these guys, like doesn't need the ball, is an absolute load on defense and can guard probably 1 through 3.5 or something like that. And for this team, that's super, super useful. I think in certain situations, I think we'll see some games where they don't use him as much because they don't need it. Like there's going to be some matchups where he actually they're just not going to need his skill set, but he's a really nice guy to know you have it, especially like on a team like the Hawks that are super wing heavy, and you can kind of make sure like against the Hawks in certain lineups, he can pick up 1 through 4. Right. And so
fighting over the screens, the switches, etc. That's to talk about like some of the limitations athletically, by NBA standards of a Blake Griffin, of a Millsap, right? Of a Joe Harris, like as you get down the line there, that's where a Bembry does become increasingly more valuable because you can say, yeah, I'll get there, right? I will affect the shot as opposed to maybe coming up a little bit short on some of these closeouts. So it's just that again, it's a footnote in a lot of ways, but I this evolution of where the team's coming from last year and into this season, I think we're finally starting to see it, right? And you had to wait.
Yeah.
An entire 8 games, right? To finally start to get the sample size on it.
It looked a hell of a lot more like together in this game, right?
Important against the Hawks too, right? Like important to do it against a quality team. Fans that said it on YouTube when they, you played Detroit, you played the Pacers that were beat up and without a lot of their key players. It's true. So now you did it against a team that has a full cast of weapons, full arsenal at their disposal, and you were able to do this.
Yeah, this was a good win. This was a really good win. They looked good. They looked really good in the second half. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like there's no caveats either. They played a really cohesive, good game. Like there were not a lot of flaws in what they did in this game. They cured some of the major problems they've been having up to this point. Those things didn't come back to bite them. They were able to mostly keep the ball. Like they did not turn the ball over a ton for the most part for them, right? Like didn't get crushed in transition. Like they didn't get killed on the offensive glass. These things that have been problematic for them were just not problems tonight, and they hit their shots. And like when that's going to happen, a team like the Nets is going to win a lot of games. So really good win.
Yes,
happy to see it. We are going to close out the week tomorrow. We'll kind of sum this one up. We'll look ahead to the weekend. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. All the episodes are up on our Locked On Nets YouTube channel. The link will be in the show notes. Getting those numbers, trying to get to 500. That's our new goal. We're closing in on 400. Want to get to 500 in short order. Every episode and more is up on YouTube. Thanks again for making Locked On Nets your first listen, and make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Nets YouTube channel.
Take this into consideration when examining the Brooklyn Nets and the way they approach dismantling an opponent. The aim of Tai Chi is not to strike first to gain dominance over an opponent, but to wait and hit at the right moment. Guao Gun Chang.
I thought you were going to say, like, put him in a headlock and noogie. Like, that'd be a cool payoff for that.
And
like,
then,
something like that.
Wet Willie.
Yeah, just take that. Like, shove their head in the toilet, and then you get your
into the locker. We're doing swirlies right now.
It'd be such a cool payoff if that was the actual thing. All right, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.